It is really great to be here. This is personally my favorite conference every year. I love BSidesAugusta. Hey, I don't know about you all, but I have seen an amazing number of talks today. I have not seen a single talk where I didn't go, oh, that's new data, wrote that down, I got to go do some more digging on that. So please, 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 when you see all the volunteers around and all the B-side shirts, etc., thank them. They have worked their tails off to make this happen, especially after our little hurricane incident last year, and a lot of stuff had to be redone. So they do this out of a love of our industry and for us, not making any money off of it. So please do thank them. All right, so I'm going to talk today. My official title here is Scattered Spider, but this is less about Scattered Spider, certainly includes them, but more really about how the adversaries are moving to the cloud. I'm seeing and talking to a bunch of my peers, seeing folks struggling with how do I do detection natively in the cloud? How do I find them? And that's really what I want to focus on, is giving everybody just some good information on how we're seeing these cloud breaches happen. And they're ramping up, they're going faster and faster and faster. And so my real objective is to hopefully arm you a little bit on that. Of course, Scattered Spider, if you're not familiar with them, shame on you. Go do some Googling and research. They have become prevalent. But it's not just, like I said, it's not just about Scattered Spider. Scattered Spider has demonstrated how utterly ineffective a lot of our defenses can be against simple social engineering attacks. And I'll give you some specific examples because I like to use real-world cases on this. So earlier this year, it wasn't Scattered Spider, I'm confident it wasn't, but it looked just like their techniques. So about 10 a.m. in the morning, the HR help desk at this organization gets a call and says, hey, I'm locked out, I need my employee ID. And they had enough data, including full social, for an executive at this particular organization. So the HR person goes, okay, yep, you've done the validation. They gave the employee ID. Hung up, called the help desk. Now that they're armed with the employee ID, which was the other piece of data they needed for the validation for the help desk, they got the password reset and the MFA reset. So they could reestablish both of them from scratch, logged into that Office 365 instance, then proceeded, what this particular actor and why I'm pretty confident it wasn't Scattered Spider, they went straight for the HR system and they changed the direct deposit bank account for the executive's pay to one that they control. Hung up, called back, did the same thing for another executive. I know, right? It just, so unfortunately for this particular organization, all of their controls were completely ineffective. Now that one's not specifically cloud-based. There was a lot of a cloud piece in, but a lot of what I'll talk about today was not part of that particular one. But that's the kind of thing that we've seen a dramatic uptick in. And a lot of that, it really comes down to tightening up our policies in how we do this. So let's talk about the different components. Specifically, I'm going to be mostly focused around cloud because that's where I'm finding in talking to friends and peers that we've got a lot of gaps, right? So we've got from accounts to cloud infrastructures. I'm sure all of you are familiar with initial access brokers and the rise with them, right? There's a lot of clear evidence that Scattered Spider is making money on the side as an initial access broker, that they'll get a lot of this via the social engineering, then turn around and sell these accesses to organizations rather than do it themselves. So you can see there's a bunch of examples, a bunch of the talks, starting with Dr. Ulrich this morning, have talked about several of these, right? And then we move to persistence in the cloud, right? We're seeing them using cloud native, and I'm going to do some demos to actually see a bunch of this. They're focusing, hopefully no surprise to anybody here, on identity, because identity is, of course, everything in the cloud. And they're looking to get that one foothold, and then we'll use some techniques that I'm going to demonstrate here in a minute to use that to gain. Ultimately, they're trying to get to the control plane, if the cloud instance is configured with a control plane, or if not, just a simple cloud admin credential so that they can take. You can see several of their tools, right? A lot of the standard stuff that I'm sure you've seen, like the AnyDesk, TeamViewer, et cetera. A lot of the stuff we're seeing is direct console stuff, and I'll lay that out here in a minute, where they're trying as quickly as possible to get to the AWS console, Azure console, et cetera, in order to be able to pipe commands directly. Then they're doing a variety of credential dumping. The credential access is mostly on local systems. So think about the keynote this morning where he talked about the supply chain and targeting of the developers. That's a huge focus for the folks who are interested going after our cloud instances, because of course they've got a lot of keys set up for pushing to the cloud, for a lot of the pipelines that they're using, et cetera. So that's a huge focus on the credential area for them to use to go after this cloud access. And then of course, we've seen a huge explosion in ransomware deployment in the cloud. So I had a big case early this year, February timeframe. You know, they pivoted in to the local organization. They were able to get AWS cloud credentials for the organization, got up into AWS cloud. They're using just simple AWS native commands. So, you know, S3 CP, copy the S3 buckets out into local control, or using SSH reverse tunnels to pipe into the consoles and such. So again, I'll show all of that with the intent of standard ransomware, but in the cloud. In the cloud, it's a lot easier and faster typically for them. And so, as you might imagine, you know, even a year ago, I was just, you know, being asked to help with different situations. Cloud instances were mostly smash and grabs, right? They'd you know, get access, they'd hit and pull out whatever data they could, or they do crypto mining, right? Cryptocurrency mining on the platform, just some simple things like that. We've very much evolved over the past year and plus, where they're getting much more sophisticated and being cloud native. In particular, if your cloud is configured, and it should be, with a control plane architecture, you've got to be hyper mindful of what's going on, who's got access, what are your blast radiuses for your identities, and as you'll see, some of the groups that we use for that. Okay, and I will do questions. So why cloud? You know, I get asked this a fair bit. And more specifically, what are they doing in cloud? Of course, they're doing data theft and extortion around that data theft. They're doing ransomware in the cloud has become extremely common, again, with extortion intent. Another thing we've seen a huge uptick in is staging. So one of the simple things that has taken off in the last few years is a dangling DNS problem. So what I mean by that is you've got your engineering teams, you're building your pipelines to push your code to cloud, right? And then you scale some of that back. Well, your pipeline automatically provisioned a DNS record on your company's domain pointing to a particular IP address. Now you scale back, the cloud provider recovers that IP address, but you don't get rid of the DNS entry. So when you do a reverse lookup on this IP, it's going to the IP with your company's domain or the company that owns it, even though it's now under the control of a threat actor. So there's a lot of scanning for that because a lot of the reputational stuff for like spamming and other things are tied to domain, reputation, and other things. So this staging to use our infrastructure to attack others has really started to ramp up a lot, and I expect it to grow a lot more as we go. Of course, compute resources. A lot initially of this was just cryptocurrency mining. That has expanded greatly beyond just cryptocurrency mining for building models in your compute infrastructure so that they can use your compute, for instance. And of course, as was called out earlier, supply chain attacks via credentials, et cetera, have just become really prevalent. So the plane itself, right, the control plane in cloud should be your governance layer, right? And so it's attractive for your engineering teams and infrastructure teams because, of course, it's central management for the cloud. Well, that also means it's central management for the threat actors if they gain access to it. So you really want to treat your control planes in cloud as critical infrastructure for your organization from a defense perspective, right? Everybody still with me? I know it's mid-afternoon, trying to keep the energy up so folks aren't nodding off. All right. So here's an example of a representative attack. Might be a little too small to see. So, you know, we've got Scattered Spider, one of the similar folks, SMS phishing, SIM swapping. I'm sure you all are seeing a huge uptick in the SMS phishing as an initial vehicle, since a lot of the BYOD devices, we don't have any way of having visibility as defenders to what's going to our folks. That gets them into, you know, some sort of cloud level access, usually not admin out of the gate, usually even a low level access, but as I run a demo here in a second, you'll see how they parlay that into a deeper access. They do a recon, get to the serial console, and then run something like this one, right? Where we've got a process event that's using a reverse shell, right, piped out to the attacker's C2 infrastructure, right? Super simple. It's worked for decades at this point, at least. Works in the cloud just as well as it works in our local environments. And of course, then they get RTP and various and go on to have all of their fun. So that's often what the sequence. So in some sort of initial credential theft, which then gets parlayed into higher level credentials so that they can leverage it. So this is a really nice breakdown we found on, you know, kind of some of the different attacks at the different layer. Of course, for today, I'm focusing primarily on the infrastructure as a service layer, right, the cloud layer. But I include this larger slide because it's important for us to understand that even though the threat actors are focusing very much on the cloud native, and that's an area that we need to dramatically improve our defenses, it by no means is the whole story, right? For those of you who've attended a lot of my talks, you know I'm a huge fan in creating an attacker's dilemma, where we're building an environment where we just need to catch them somewhere in this larger attack stream and break that chain before they complete their objective, right? And so that's why I included that. But for purposes of today, I really want to drill into the cloud layer, right? And these are some of the techniques that we're seeing and some of the hunts that we're using to go look for indications of compromise in these cloud environments, right? So of course, attackers, we've got things like the AWS Management Console, S3 browser, Cloud Shell. All of those have a ton of information on what exists in this environment, right? Of course, S3, if you're in AWS, is going to tend to be where a lot of your critical data is going to be sitting that they can potentially exfiltrate. And it's super easy to copy. If they get in, you know, it's just an S3 SCP command to copy that out to wherever destination they want and do that. They can do enumeration via things like Billing Console and the Systems Manager interface in AWS. of course, they're going for credential harvesting and takeover. Credential harvesting are things like they'll look at the CI/CD pipeline that runs in the cloud. Do you have any embedded credentials in environment variables and scripts and things like that are a great place for that, right? Your AWS API keys and such will often be accessible if they get into that. So all of those are direct vehicles that they can extract to go against us. We've got instance profile replacement, right? They can go in, you've got a running instance in your cloud. They can configure the profile on that to replace it with credentials that allow takeover, other things. I'm sure you're not surprised they're going to often disable guard duty and stop your logging, right, from your AWS cloud. S3 data theft we've talked about, and of course EC2 takeover. So how do we look for all of that? Well, here's some examples that are hunting to look for possible indications that we've got either one, a problem of an existing compromise, or just as importantly, do we have a situation where the environment is ripe for this kind of an incursion if they get some level of access to the system? Okay? So let's run a little demo here to actually show this in action. I'm going to pause it because we're going to come back in a little bit and I'm going to talk about defense on this. All right? So this particular demo, we've got a Cloud Shell into AWS open. We see that. I'll keep pausing it to make sure, right? Looking for who am I, essentially, right? To see what level of access we've got in this particular environment at the moment. Then we use a simple command to list out all of our roles. Scroll for those. What we're looking for here are roles that are assumable, is what the threat actor is looking for. Sorry, I should hold the microphone up better. All right? So finds a role there, that's assumable, then can issue a single command and take on that role, add it to my existing, i.e. cloud native privilege escalation, right? So we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's talk about how do we prevent that. So okay, now I'm talking about the bad. How do we talk about the good? As you all know, I never want to leave without giving you some ability to defend yourself better. Well, of course, this is why it's a little harder to do cloud native detection and response than it is in the infrastructure, right? We've got all sorts of levels of groups that are going on, depending on the architecture. Often, different engineering teams have their own instances within our larger cloud instance that isn't closely regulated, right? Just the fact that these workloads are dynamic in most cases is problematic because they're spinning up, they're spinning down. Depending on how your logging is configured, there can be a lot of logs to parse through, right? And so the bottom line is, if from the defender's or from the attacker's perspective, why this ends up being so attractive for them is the majority of us are still relying on EDR, XDR for most of our detection. So what do I mean by that? Well, we are in AWS, we're in Azure, we stand up a bunch of virtual machines, and what do? We deploy EDR XYZ to those machines. Well, when they're issuing control plane, Cloud Shell natively, none of that is seen by our EDR XDR, right? That's only going in your CloudTrail logs, and only if you've got your CloudTrail configured appropriately, right? So, as most of you know, and full disclosure, oh, did we lose it? Oh, just the one screen, I guess. I'm an advisor for Calvio. Calvio has done a lot of this research in their work to how do we defend this. And so, full disclosure there, but I think most of you know I won't associate with an organization I don't believe in. And so, as you've seen probably some of my talks, I'm a huge proponent on honey tokens. Our front monitors are cutting in and out. There they go. So what do we do in cloud? Well, we can do deceptive IAM users, roles, and service principals, right? We can add IAM stores that are, again, deception-based, right? I don't know what's going on, but they're blinking in and out. Thank you. I'll look at the back side. We can also do workload-based, right? Inside of our workloads, of course, we can use the same sorts of deception that we would use within our on-prem environment, you know, in terms of honey token accounts, keys, secrets, so on and so forth. All of this scales really, really well to the cloud. So then the way that plays out in terms of the activity is I'll pause, see if we get it back. There we go. It's blinking on my screen as well. So the way this plays out is, think about that demo that I just did, right? They're in, who am I? List my own credentials. I list the locally provisioned groups, scroll through those, looking for, ideally, something that's got an admin role of some sort, right? And essentially enumerate. Well, of course, if we provision deceptive tokens on accounts, deceptive workloads, etc., then all we need is the adversary to hit one of ours and we're off to the races, right? So again, we subvert, we've got the token, boom, our SOC knows we've got a problem in the cloud and can chase after it. So let's go back to the demo here. Pick up where we left off. So lists out the different credentials. We're now parsing through those. Notice the action assume role in here that allows us to do, and these are common, used for services like backups, other sorts of services that need to run in cloud in order to gain access. So now the user is trying to attach to one of those existing policies, then retrieves the update on it. But in this case, we've created a deceptive identity access management role. So now when they go ahead and attempt to assume it here, of course, what that does, since it's not a real role and is set up, they get a failure to execute, and we get an alert back in our SOC that we've got a problem, right? Because people scraping around for these roles just to look for these isn't something that should be happening in our workloads, right? And so it's a super simple approach. And just to be clear, you don't need to have a Calvio for this. You know, there's other approaches to this. The key, you can do this in your workloads manually. It just is a lot of maintenance, which is, you know, why having a commercial product can really, really be helpful in this. So, keys here, if you want to go down this path, you want to think about that they've got to be realistic, they've got to be enticing, of course. Think about the identities they're looking for and focus in on those. And of course, like everything else, what we're looking to do is defense in depth, right? This by no means, says that we shouldn't have, our CSPM or ASPM, all of the segmentation, et cetera. As you might imagine from my years at Mandiant, I'm a believer that prevention ultimately fails, and we've got to be ready to intervene when it fails. I very much look at prevention as a bar. The higher our prevention, the higher our bar, the less bad guys that get over it, but we got to know when those bad guys get over it, right? And that's essentially what we're trying to do here is how do we get through all of that noise in the cloud and get to those sorts of things. So I am supposed to give out 3 giveaways here, and then we'll open up for Q&A. What's one of the alternate designations people refer to scattered spider by? I saw that hand first. I'm sorry, can't quite hear you. Yes, all right. Nice job. Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. All right, we also have Practical Linux Forensics. What is the S3 bucket copy command look like? From Cloud Shell, CP. Exactly. They made it kind of familiar to Linux for a reason. Nice job. And last but not least, we have a wireless USB-C adapter to give away. Let's see, what's another good question? I'll hold on that for a minute. Let's open up for Q&A. Questions? Yes, sir. Correct. I mean, that's part of what makes this challenging, right? But a normal user is going to log in, do whatever they're going to do. They're not going to be doing things like looking at all of the groups and all of that recon. It's a lot of that recon that we want to build our detection around because that's not normal activity, right? Not that it won't ever happen, of course, with some of our engineering teams, but it's definitely a tell for it. Some of the earlier talks, like Steph's talk earlier this afternoon, right, where she was talking about some of the very specific things, the threat actors, those are all still valuable in cloud context as well. The problem is a lot of that happens at the host layers if you're running virtual machines in cloud instead of at the control plane layer. And so the key here is you want to go look at what's going on your control plane layers and make sure you've got some robust detection around that. I saw another hand, I thought over this way. Other questions? Sure, go for it. Yes. Yeah. 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 No. So his question is, well, all right, so we've got a threat actor. The threat actor gains access to our account. They've heard about things like honey accounts, and so they're nervous about picking the right one. They could go look at the logs and look for lack of activity in the logs. Absolutely, except they'll need admin to do that. or at least if we've configured correctly. And if they've got admin, then they don't really need to do that already. So it's a chicken egg problem for them on one thing. Two, your more sophisticated platforms are putting a lot of energy into making these look realistic, right? Like, you don't want to do just static, put these things out there and then just call it good. You want them to be changing up, et cetera. Ideally you want a platform that's looking at your existing, so as your engineering teams deploy new infrastructure to cloud, they're going, oh, well, they're using these patterns, so we should add these groups and et cetera. That's really where the magic happens, in my perspective, right? And why I'm so kind of passionate about this approach is because, I did my last tour of duty at Mandiant was as their chief security officer, and as you might imagine, Mandiant's got a few folks who don't like them very much, I think it's fair to say. Russia and China in particular have a bit of a angst for them, right? And O-days are just what they are, right? There's a lot of indications that China, when they pulled back there for a while and retooled, a lot of effort was putting on O-days. We've seen a lot of O-days coming out of what looks to be Chinese activity, right? And so that means they're going to get a foothold, but we don't need to lose then, right? And we need to focus on the needs of the attacker, right? That's how I ultimately approach any of this is, all right, well, what does the attacker need? They need connectivity. They need either access credentials or exploits to move around, right? And they need to get to wherever they're going that's got the data that they're looking for, right? So those needs are universal. So I would start in cloud with, all right, how would a threat actor, what do they need in order to move around within my cloud environment, right? Start with that with your engineering teams, whether you're GCP, Azure, AWS, all three or the bajillion other clouds, but those are obviously our primaries. They will all have unique aspects based upon the configuration on how your clouds are configured. And so you're going to want to partner with them, and that's also why I included the threat hunting stuff, is that's a really good way to kind of get an idea on where your exposure, for want of a better word, is in cloud in terms of those accesses. And some of the tooling, like your Wizzes and other CSPMs, right, can help with that as well, with the blast radius and some of the other stuff, attack path mapping, et cetera. Those are all really useful complements to this for where do I want to poison that potential attack path for the threat actor. Yes, sir. Delete imitations? Because what you'll find is often they will create additional accounts and other groups and other things for themselves, and then they want to get rid of the record of all of that creation, right? They want to create persistence in these environments like they would anywhere else. Yes, sir. So let me recap your question, make sure I'm catching it right. So AWS has a specific role designed for isolating identities that have been compromised. I would always go out and look and see what that identity's done in addition to assigning it that role, for sure, right? If you know that identity's been compromised, then I would look at things like, well, what other identities and groups would it is a member of, did it have access to, any kind of CloudTrail logging around use of that identity. A lot of the interesting vehicles, more interesting incidents I've seen have involved not just direct access to the credentials, as in what I'm trying to articulate here, not very well. Think not just logging in directly from these credentials. Say you're running application X, and turns out application X has some sort of a vulnerability that they can take advantage of to gain access to the instance that that application is running as, right? Then being able to chain that into running additional instances and et cetera. So the use of identity shouldn't be thought of in cloud from my perspective as just direct interaction, but also inferred interaction through essentially supply chain challenges as well, if that makes sense. Absolutely. Any other questions? All right, we've got one more giveaway. Any idea on questions we should ask for this last one? I'm brain blanking on a question. All right, great. What's my favorite color? I'll go. Green. I heard a green. That was the first green I heard. Green is my favorite color.
All right, thank you so much, Tim.
Hey, thank you everybody for attending.
They miss.
Well deserved, well deserved.